and welcome to DynamicsCon. So excited to have everyone here today. Also, I want to give a big thank you to all of our sponsors who make this event possible. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Mary Thompson. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and my area of specialty is using the Power Platform to extend Business Central. I am the Chief Maximizer at World Max, a brand new company and adventure that I'm starting on my own. So I'm really excited about that. I am also a huge Dynamics user group supporter. I owe so much of my career to this specific DynamicsCon event, so it's always fun. I am also a Power Platform evangelist, as it has helped me make my dreams come true. And not only am I a dreamer, but I also have really big dreams for everyone else. And I like to think that maybe perhaps my superpower is helping others believe in themselves as well. So rewind back like 14 months ago, I actually knew very little to nothing about APIs. Since then, I have created several solutions that customers are using today in their day-to-day businesses that help automate Business Central and integrate it with other systems. I've done this using the HTTP connectors. So I've gotten pretty slick at what needs to happen with them. I probably could have named this session Hours of My Life That I'll Never Get Back, but I thought 10 tips and tricks sounded a little bit better. With that being said, let's take a look at what we're going to cover today. You see that I lied already. I apologize. I think it'll be the only time in this presentation, but it ended up actually only being 9 tips and tricks that I could condense in this short 20-minute period. So we'll have to wait for a new one next time. But things that we're going to cover. Overall, we're going to take a look at the difference between the HTTP request and response. Then we're going to take a deep dive into the kind of structure of what we're working with with the HTTP request. We're going to take a look at some tips and tricks, right? How do we store our variables? How do we clean our data? How do we get a nice body in there? And then we're going to take a look at the HTTP response structure, right? So we're going to take a look at the other side of it. And again, we're going to take a deep dive into what are we doing with it? How do we easily create the JSON body, or like the meat of what needs to go into that step, and also how to test it. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is the request versus the response. Very easily thinking about it, the request, the one that I have here on my left, right? So there's request here, that's pulling information, right? I think that that's things that we're very familiar with. That's your standard API. You're going to make a request, you're going to go out there, you're going to search for the information, and then you're going to come back and bring it in, right? That's what this one is doing. The HTTP response, however, this one right here, that's more of like think of it like as like a catcher, right? If you were to put a big like satellite out there and, circle around like, when is an event going to happen, right? That's more of like what the response is. It's receiving information in. And then one thing that they both do have in common is that they're using the JSON formatting. So if you're not good with JSON formatting, these can be quite intimidating, especially if you're new at the HTTP connectors as well. All right, so again, like I said, if you are new, let's take a look a little bit more at what that HTTP request is really asking for and doing. So we have our first screen, right? This is just your general HTTP request. The first thing it's going to ask you for is method, right? So think about, what are you using in Postman, or what are you using in Visual Studio Code? You're going to see get, put, post, patch, and delete, right? Nothing new, they are very, very basic as of what you would expect. Now, this URI, that's just the URL. right? That's just the API that you're working with, or that structure, what you'd normally call whatever you're putting in Postman for your URL, put it in here, right? Then we're going to have headers, but I'm going to jump a little bit more into this in a little bit. Now, the body, depending on what type of method you're using, you may or may not have a body that you're going to put in here. And we'll just take a little bit deeper look at that in a little bit as well. Finally, when we look at the authentication, we'll see the basic authentication methods that we would expect in any other place like Postman or Visual Studio. Obviously, the most two common ones that you're going to be using are your basic, and you also have your OAuth credentials. Speaking of credentials, that takes us to our next tip and trick number 3, and that is, how do we store and save our credentials? So if you have that HTTP step in several areas of your flow, if you need to change or update, let's say, the web service key or the username and web service key, you're going to have to update that in every single spot on your flow. So what I actually recommend that you do is at the beginning of your flow, before you even have your first HTTP request, go ahead and put in a variable and call one username and one web service key. Then as you can see here, what I did is I named it that. I have the type as a string, and then your value will be whatever that username is. And same thing for the web service key. The reason for that is that way, whenever you have to update it, you just have to update it in one place, and then you use these variables in that HTTP request is instead. Where you would put your username, you'll put this variable. Where you would put your web service key, you'll put this variable. And that way, any changes that you need will just be automatically transferred down through the flow. So you only have to change it one time instead of multiple times. And there's many times I've thought that I've had it all the way through, but it didn't work and my flow failed anyways. So good tip there. All right, continuing on with tip number 5 is looking at headers and queries. So your headers, there's 2 ways. They're not always needed. First, let me say that. They're not always needed. And so you're going to know if you need them by 2 different things. 1, your documentation is going to tell you. 2, you're going to get an error message after you try to run it that says, oops, you need a header. So either way, you'll figure it out. But basically what they do is it allows additional information to be passed through from that HTTP request. A lot of times if you have, rich media content, maybe you're going to have an additional header. One really common header type that I've worked with is you'll see that it's content type and application JSON, this first one right here. So that's basically all you need to know about headers for right now. I think that the real win is looking at these queries and being able to use these efficiently. It really helps clean up the data. So OData, right, is OData expressions are a unified way to process and consume data. Then we have things like filter, order by, select, and batch. And this allows you to specify what data it is that you want. Let's take a look at a sales order and walk through a few of these so you can get an idea of maybe how you would need to use them. So a sales order, for example, if I wanted to filter the array that I was getting from, my source and to just have a specific sales order and pull it by that number, then I would use filter and say, order number equals, and then use that specific content. That would be a filter. Order by would be if I wanted to sort all of my orders, maybe in descending or ascending order. That's how you could do that. And then carrying that through to select, Think about on the sales order table, there's many, many, many fields. So whenever you're bringing that array in, you're just getting a lot of data, and that's putting a lot of, processing time on that call. So you can actually improve, your flow by restricting which fields you want. So let's say I only want to look at the columns of sales order number and customer number, for example. I can use the select field to only pull those two records through. Finally, batch is a unique one that's not really that common, but I've used it with things like Business Central. And what it does is it allows you to post multiple requests at one time, or to send multiple requests at one time. Overall, the purpose of them is to really clean up the data and structure it nicely. As you move on to subsequent steps in your flow, having nice, clean data that you can easily troubleshoot and identify makes flow building a lot easier. So I would definitely take advantage of using those headers and queries. Step number 5 is a fun little trick. I call it compose for body, right? So when we were looking at our HTTP request here, we see that one of the areas is the body. So for example, if you're using an HTTP method of post and I need to create a sales order, well, in there, you're going to have the body of the sales order. I don't really like this little screen. It's really tiny. Now, if I copied and paste this into here, it would expand it, but then it just makes this step really long, right? It's possible, but what I like to do instead, a lot of times, is build the body of my request in a compose step, right? And have this above the create order. And then again, what it allows you to do is easily modify the order body in the compose step. So again, if you were going to use this in multiple places, it would be easier to just have it here. Also, I think for troubleshooting, if something's not working, it's a lot easier to read the body response that you're expecting if you have it in a compose step above, opposed trying to read what came through the array. So for troubleshooting purposes, I think it's really handy to have it here and then just pass the outputs of this step into your body of your HTTP request there. Now, that brings us to the end of our HTTP request tips and tricks, and that sends us right into number 6, our HTTP response structure. So let's give a few minutes here to kind of talk through what this looks like. For me, this is one of my newest skill sets. So I know there's not a lot of documentation out there, which is one of the reasons that inspired me to make this session. On here, the first part that you will have is this HTTP post URL. Now, I'll dive into that in a few more minutes as well. The next area that you have is what's called the request body JSON. And it's, what am I going to do with the data once I receive this call, or how do I want it to look? You also have method. And again, this is going to give you a drop down for the different types of methods. And this is what method is going to trigger the action that will then make the response be received. So most of the time it's going to be post. So in the scenario of whenever a sales order is shipped, right? So if you have a third party that's going to ship something and you want to be notified whenever that happens, the method to post that ship or to send that sales order will likely be post. Again, if you read the documentation of the different services that you're using, it will identify what you need to use in here as well. All right, let's talk about the request body JSON schema, because originally to me, it was just this big old empty box and nothing there. So it sounds a little bit overwhelming at first, but then I realized it was actually a lot easier than I made it out to be. And I think that reading is often quite interesting, Because if I look at here, it says request body. Then I realized when I understood what it was, is it's just taking the output of what you want to receive. So let's think about that sales order example again, right? Whenever I want to be notified that a sales order is going to be shipped, I'm looking to receive that sales order. So I need a copy, like I'm going to build a template off of what it is that I want to receive. So I'm going to take the output of the HTTP body, and there's this little use sample payload. I'm not sure if you can see this here, but there's this teeny tiny little link here. So if you click that, it brings you here. So then, you're going to copy and paste that just like any other JSON format, structure, like if you're using the parse JSON and it helps you give you that schema, same thing here, right? Copy, paste, hit done. And what that is going to do is give you this nice schema here, right? Based off of the input that I had. Now, of course, I already have my post method set up as well. Now, what does this do? It gives us dynamic content. I created this little compose box down here in my flow just so that you could see the dynamic content that was then available based off of what I entered. Now, let me slow down and say this again, because I know that that was a lot of words, but now that we have all the pictures out, let's walk through it one more time for you. So first you have just the empty box. You'll click on the link. You'll put your JSON body in here, copy and paste, hit done. That's going to generate your schema. And then make sure you have your post method in here. And then what that does, it gives you the values that you're going to be able to use later on in your flow. Super helpful. Now I know quickly here as well that I have this icon. It doesn't mean that that's from the previous flow. It just means there's an HTTP body that you're going to copy in there. The next tip that I have for you is the HTTP response URL. Sometimes this can be a little overwhelming as well, and we can see here, this is my before picture, and it's just empty. It says, it's waiting for you to save it. So we're going to do all the things that we need to do. We'll hit save. And now you see that I have a URL that is listed in here, right? So we went from nothing to something. We also have this nice little copy button here, which will be very helpful as we move into tips and trick number 9. What we have here is testing that HTTP response. What we do is we grabbed the previous URL so that we could copy it in here, which you will see, right? We have it in here on I use Postman, so I've got it in my post function. I also have a body here because I'm going to test. I'm going to send over a sample order so that then my HTTP response has something to listen to, right? This is how I can test it to make sure it's giving me what I want and that the actions are properly happening. Then what's going to happen next is I'm going to have to actually send this, right? So if I hit send, then what it does is you have magic powers that come out and it hits the flow, right? That's what I was saying. It triggers the flow. And as we can see here by the glorious green check, it meant that the flow was successful. So in this scenario, it allows you to test it, right? Which I think is really helpful because that way you're not waiting for like a live event to happen. So that is my trick number 9. Now I've got really exciting news for everyone. I'm really happy to announce that you guys are all now HTTP heroes after you have consumed and processed my tips and tricks. Let's quickly go over them again, right? High level, you now should be much more familiar with the difference between an HTTP request and an HTTP response, and a few little tips and tricks on how to easily work with them, some stuff that maybe you're not going to find right in your normal documentation. So I hope that you found all of that really helpful. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending DynamicsCon once again for this amazing event. I'd also like to give a big shout out to our sponsors who do make all of this happen. I'd love to connect with you, so please feel free to go ahead and scan the code that's here on the screen. That will give you a link to a couple different ways to connect with me. Also, you can leave your email address because I'd sure love to reach out to you as well. And I can't wait to see everyone with all of your questions on our live Q&A. So don't forget to put your questions in there now. Thanks. See you soon.
All right, Mary, I think we're live. This is exciting.
Excellent. Excellent. I think we're not. I don't know. I think the thing's over. Anyway, so we're live. I'm just going to go with Kristen. Oh, yeah, we are live. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, so that was a great presentation, Mary. I know myself, I'm more of a functional consultant for BC, so a lot of that, what you were talking about,
is new for you. We'll do some quick intros here. Obviously, Kristen is my lovely moderator today, and then I am Mary Thompson. You probably know me for normally dressing up in crazy costumes. I'm a little under the weather today, so this is what you get. But Kristen is going to be here and help me moderate, and we're going to answer some lovely questions here. Kristen, are you still there? You look like I lost you. Yep, I think so. So I'll go ahead and pull some questions out. So the first one that we had was Mike had asked if we can dynamically authenticate the backend service, right? Basically, can we use HTTP and have it authenticate via Azure Active Directory? And the answer is yes. There is actually a specific HTTP request. If you go into Flow, basically the one that I showed is a green icon, and the Azure one is blue. So that will use your Azure authentication to help you log in, or if you want to authenticate that way. So that was a great question. I think that Christian, going through your question, I thought that was really great too. So Christian's question was any tips on when to build a flow with an HTTP request versus a custom connector that can be reused for various flows. So I think you hit part of it right on the head, Christian. I think it's, how prevalent is the data that you need and how much. So let me just break that down for a second. So what I'll normally do, a lot of times in a flow, clearly I love to integrate everything to Business Central via the Power Platform. So I use the APIs, right, that are associated with that. Now, a lot of times I can use the standard connector, but sometimes I have to use the API. For example, I have an on-prem project right now, and so I'm actually having to use the HTTP request to grab sales logs, right? Because that way I can kind of map that in there. But I'm not going to create a connector for that because I actually only need it like one time in that particular scenario. Now, let's say I had an entire flow, but there was no standard connector. Then I would probably definitely build a custom connector for that if I was going to have the majority of the data for the flow coming through that. But I also have a few connectors, right, on certain things that like I'll use all the time, or different applications that I connect to. I'll create a special one for that and save them, like you said, kind of rinse and repeat. I missed the scan. I am. Thank you, Herb Johnson. I just saw your thing. You said you missed the scan. I am on YouTube. You can find me at a really original name, Mary Thompson. So you should be able to find me easily in there, and I can connect with you as well and send you my information. Roland has a question as well here. Hi, Mary. Do you have a tip for the HTTP response when a flow is deployed on other instances? The URL is only created when saving and is different on another instance. I don't know if I fully understand the question. To be perfectly honest with you, Roland, I would love to connect maybe on LinkedIn to get a little bit more information on what it is that you mean there, because I'm so sorry, I just don't quite fully understand. Yeah, I saw Kristen, she got bumped up. So is the web service key deprecated? Kristen, that's a really good question, because for SaaS, right, for BC Online, the SaaS application, it is, right? It is being deprecated, I think in a matter of days. Honestly, I think it was like April 22 was when they were actually going to make that happen. So right now, I'm encouraging all my clients to move over to OAuth, which you can set up. But ironically enough, this is something I found out this week, that web service key is not deprecated for on-prem. So if you are on-prem and you want to use that web service key, that will still work for you now. So that's really good. All right. And so then Kristen has said, can I make an external HTTP request using Flow in Power Automate? I think I understand what you mean too, Kristen. I think I don't know. Actually, maybe I thought so. Maybe the pain medications or the medicine's filling in. I'm not sure. But Kristen, I know you asked me that earlier, and I said yes. And so I think what you mean is, can I use Power Automate to go out there and generate different flows? I'm sorry, different requests, maybe outside of even Dynamics 365, right? And if that's what you mean, then the answer is yes, you can use that HTTP connector for any URL or API. Let's see here. I think I had one other question, but no, maybe not. So, Roland, I will, like I said, I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn so that I can better understand your question, and then maybe we can share it out to everyone as well. So I want to thank everyone again so much for coming to the session today. And always a big shout out to DynamicsCon, Doug, and all of the amazing sponsors that make this truly wonderful event happen. And I hope that everyone has a really good day. Thank you.